Hello and welcome back, everybody. Thank you for sticking with us so far. And, hello to very likely the end of the Killer's Stand, where me and Martin, my co host, are discussing the Black Madonna, the infamous Cult Divinity Lost campaign. And, I'm David, this is Martin, and we're both running and discussing this marvelous campaign. It's been quite a journey. I finished my first run, and I've been so foolish to start another one. But Martin, you're on episode
24 now.
Ooh, fantastic. So 24 episodes of Black Madonna behind your back, and I just want to point out another advisor. If again some players are starting to listen to this one, stop right now unless you want to be spoiled, because we're not holding back on any information. We're going to reveal everything, discuss everything, but it might be helpful to send it to your GM and say like, hey, get some inspiration here, because I definitely learned something in my past.
And our goal with this series is to support GMs who want to run the Black Madonna and Cult Divinity Lost and sort of fully embrace the narrative-driven style that this game has, as opposed to maybe the more combat-heavy 1990s style where the Black Madonna originated. And we will talk about sort of how you can adapt and change the campaign, what challenges to expect, and pieces of history and metaphysics that you might want to ponder to bring this to life for your group.
And don't we have something to tell about changing the campaign? But before we go any further, we do want to give a disclaimer. The Black Madonna and Cult Divinity Lost are mature themes, contain mature themes. They are also a very dark campaign, which deals with trauma, harm to children, war, abuse, death, religious imagery, gore, body horror, and so forth. If any of these topics should be not okay with you, listener discretion is advised, and we suggest to skip or to just ignore certain episodes. If anything else might trigger you, again, listener discretion is advised. This is for a mature audience.
And we should also make clear that this podcast is a fan project, so we are not officially affiliated with Helmgas to publish Cult Divinity Lost, or we're simply sharing our experiences and interpretations and advice for running this campaign.
Exactly. Despite our beautiful talk that we had last time with Mikkel and Gunilla about the campaign itself. If you haven't listened to that, go back and listen to that one. It will be the episode before this one.
Yes, but you really should.
Yeah, you definitely should. But yeah, today we're back, Martin, and we are at the end of chapter 1. We've talked about the Killer's Dance so far, the encore, as one might say, but we've now come to the point where the players come, or hopefully are, at Pagodin's mansion. The mansion that is not his townhouse, but it is the site of, a garden party of a different kind, and whatnot.
Yes, this beautiful, they describe it sort of kind of romantic, like wooden mansion with like an ungodly amount of security around it, like a 4-meter tall wall with like razor wire and glass embedded at the top of the wall, and guards with dogs who are circling around on some complicated schedule and so on, right? And this whole thing, of course, is to protect the fact that there are a lot of very important people who have congregated here tonight, as they do regularly when the moon is in the right phase, to do some occult and illegal stuff together. So they are led by our three our three main antagonists, I guess, for the first chapter here. Pogodin, Kramer, and Mahler, who are the sort of high priests, if you will, of the inner circle of the Slavic Association. So, of course, the Slavic Association, as we touched on, is not just an innocent cultural association with a book club. They also have a secret inner circle that does real magic. And, of course, as this is Cult Divinity Lost, they are doing some real human sacrifice as well. As the book describes, there are all kinds of important people from politics, from the unions, from industry, and so on. I guess you, as a GM, get to make your own list of exactly what important people you want to bring here. I brought one artist, and the rest of them sort of politics and business people. They are expecting some magical entertainment, and I guess they don't expect that they are going to be attacked somehow by a desperate group of player characters who, by this point, probably are really aching to get this counter curse ritual going and free themselves of this nasty dream curse. Yeah, and how do they do that? That's the big question, I guess.
That is a good question indeed. And I think I just want to mention again, they know about the location and or the day and time by hopefully having investigated the Slavic Association, investigated the offices and or their homes in order to get any type of clue. I also would like to stress, if they haven't, you as a GM should make the cardinal decision to just give them some leeway, make it obvious that there's something going on, caterers being ordered, or, hopefully at this time the players will have some incentive to look after the three Russians. And any kind of connections that they kind of put in place should yield something to the date of set time. I would also say it doesn't have to be specifically that day, as it said in the book. I think it's also mentioned that you can shift it depending on when the players actually would kind of approach it. I think the main point, though, is that it should be relatively close to the moment when they find the date to when the ritual is happening. So not giving them too much leeway to kind of figure things out. Although, as you nicely mentioned, it is kind of a Fort Knox. It is a Stasi headquarter in a sense. So I found it both understandable why they would not or should not have too much time to kind of investigate and fully flush out, because it delays kind of the narrative of itself. But on the other hand, it would be interesting to kind of get the player's incentive. And I think, at least from my perspective, that is also something that you can, as a GM, clarify in a discussion at the table. What are the expectations? Do you want to have a full investigation? Do you want to have like a preparation stuff? Or do you want to be surprised by stuff? That is maybe just something that I would like to re-stress, because I've realized now, talking to various people and getting beautiful feedback from listeners, that the book as written is a guideline. It is a idea of how to tell the story, but you as a GM make the final decision at the table. I made decisions in my recent second run that probably changed significant part of the story, but I will go with it and I will maintain a story with it. So make sure that the players would like to investigate. They would like to figure things out. Or if they want to be surprised, then just make it a short time period between that. Sorry, that I just wanted to bring that out, because I think it is one of the important thing here, as it's one of the highlights of the first chapter that ultimately will kick off a very stringent chain of events. That's the word for it. Because after this, there is no turning back. The lives of the characters will change. The lives of everybody involved will change. And it will begin, I would say, the proper part of the campaign.
Yeah. Yeah, and I agree. I think several good points there that I would sort of agree. Like as we said before, we're not. I don't think for most groups at least, we're not really playing Sherlock Holmes Gnostic detective. So this is very much give them enough
Oh,
clues
we're
so
not?
that
Ah, God damn it. I'm on the
you
wrong
know
podcast then.
give them enough clues that they reasonably have a chance to know what
Yeah.
to do. Don't be too stingy with it. Don't make the preparations too difficult because it becomes quite complicated already. Just the way
Yeah.
that it's written, there are a lot of names, a lot of things to keep track on, and it becomes quite a lot. So,
Mm.
and also, I think maybe this is the part of when people sit on and complain about potential railroadiness in the Black Madonna, this is probably the part that they're thinking of. The
Mm.
fact that for a lot of the events that come later to really kick off, you actually kind of want the player characters to perform this ritual and see this set piece and set everything else in
Mhm.
motion. I would say if the player characters absolutely don't want to do that, they want to do something else, there are ways to deal with that, I'm sure, and we can talk about some of those. But if they are trying to do the ritual, don't make we should let them and not make it sort of
Exactly.
too tricky to get there. We don't want them to be, and the book kind of says this as well. We don't want them to be, you know, destroyed by a group of security guards while they're trying to make the second circle around the building or whatever during the night, because that's just anticlimactic for everyone. Um, and I think it's the same
Unless
with
your
like,
players
yeah,
want to. Unless your players want to.
exactly. Unless they are, the hardcore type of old school Call of Cthulhu players who would be disappointed if you allow them an extra chance to get a clue if they failed to find it the first time, right? So I guess communication between adults is helpful
Exactly.
here. But yeah, they it is kind of Fort Knox here.
It is, right?
It's a difficult occasion, and I love. I guess this is classical good scenario design. The GM and the scenario writers make the problem, the players make the solution. There isn't really like one way to deal with Pogodin's mansion. You
Exactly.
you have to come up with your solution.
And I think here, as a GM, you even have leeway where you can say, like, if it is 2 days, 48 hours away from the time of the ritual, it will take some time to even get to the mansion unnoticed, if they want to check it out beforehand. It will take time to monitor, you know, routes and walkways of the guards. All of this is both good and bad, but they should always feel like there's always a sliver of hope, right? And as you said, it states that the easiest way is to kind of climb the wall. But if you think that this is not good enough, I had video cameras and electric fences set up in my first run, and they still it was more like ambience because they understood the significance of it. Because they were like, oh well, if it's too easy to kind of go in, they're not gonna do something weird here. But if it's Fort Knox, well, what are they doing in there that requires CCTV in the forest, an electric fence, rotating guards, watchdogs? Like, they definitely are doing something. And then there are coming these like limousines with high-ranking members of the public, politics, and newspapers and whatever. Um, well, that is going to be interesting. And I think at that point, that was actually, I think, my main point that I wanted to re-energize from our earlier discussions, and that is if the player characters have interacted by now with members of the public, with police, with media, depending on their archetypes and their occupations, in a sense, who did they talk to in order to get information about the Russians? Well, make a decision if those people might be attending the ritual. Should they be secretly enticing the idea that they will tell about the Russians easily, but they will also warn the Russians that there are people inquiring about the location, when and where and what. Um, it just should be considered by the balance of the approach of the players. If you already know that your three academics are having difficulty to even climb a fence, maybe dial down the action button, but increase the suspense button where there's political social ramifications or something. Don't force the action if you can have other levers to pull on. And I think Pogodin's mansion in itself is a playground for exactly that. Because once the characters enter, and we can go back to later when they enter to perform the ritual, but once the characters enter Pogodin's mansion and they're probably starting to perform the ritual in the same, or they maybe some, for some reason, are infiltrating the building before the ritual even to get a lay of the land, which is possible too. Don't deny the players to kind of get a lay of the land. Make it even easier for them, subduing a guard or, convincing somebody else to kind of get an idea because ultimately, at that moment, you're kind of Jigdigil, aren't you? You kind of want the players to succeed to get in there, to conduct the ritual, to make it down to the basement. And so, whatever you do, think in a sense like Jigdigil and say, like, yeah, of course, you can make the consequences notable, not insurmountable, but challenging enough that they really think that it is a threat and they succeeded in something that is important. But once they're inside, I think then a playground opens up because there's several rooms, there's several opportunities to leave clues, to leave identities, to leave information for character backgrounds, to include history, dark secrets, whatever one likes. But yeah, Martin, wanted to ask you about before we come to the ritual, maybe, and talk about a bit more about the location itself. Pogodin's mansion. It's this technically one flat mansion somewhere south of Berlin, secreted in the woods, Fort Knox style. Has a guardhouse, has a pool, driveway, and all you want for the high class German educated people. What
Even
is
a helicopter pad.
it does indeed. I forgot about that. See, that you remind me about that. What is something about the building that you found intriguing or kind of like a puzzle box where you can play with that helps?
So the things I really like about the location, and I think I've said before that I have mixed feelings about having like big keyed maps of things. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And here is a way where a place where, at least for us, it worked really well. I feel like you do get a nice, you do get like a feeling for the house by kind of like looking at the map a little bit. And there are a couple of little discoveries here, little things here that I really like. One is, of course, if you haven't had that reveal already, that there are a lot of important people coming here, right? That might be something that the characters might not expect. They might expect like a secretive three-man thing, but then it turns out that this ritual is also some kind of like, well, cocktail party of important occultists or whatever. And it reveals a lot of like the rot to society kind of thing that the cult sort of uses, I guess.
I might just interject briefly. I think that is exactly the moment when you realize that the Slavic Association is more than its members. It has the political connections. And if you go back to the Slavic Association, the archive room could contain blackmail material. We have media ideas about how that material would look like, that they could have over those people. And they leverage that to participate in these vile rituals. And they might be willing participants. That who knows how these rich and famous people work? I mean, not
Yeah.
to say that they are events that could indicate certain events, but
Yeah.
there
And
you go.
we have these strange photos that the player characters might already have picked up in
Exactly.
showing a ritual. Probably they're a bit blurry, and maybe they have some illusion shattering content to them if viewed in the wrong light, and so on. And yeah, so that's one thing. And then I really like the contrast when you get another reveal that it's not really said in the keyed map, I think, where you should have this, but you should have it at some point. The reveal that there are prisoners who are to be sacrificed. And you get a little bit of humanizing information about them, that they are from Poland. They're sort of like, you should definitely add more. I think you should give them names. You should sort of embody them a little bit when you introduce them, because they are you have these sort of circles of inferno here. And if you're lucky, this can be a very very meaningful reveal as well, and give some kind of moral choice perhaps to the player characters. I've understood that it's not uncommon for player characters, once they realize what kind of ritual this is, to go on a killing spree. Um, Not of the prisoners, but of the participants. And of course, in when we're trying to play Cult, maybe we're trying to not do random killing sprees. We're trying to, not encourage sort of classical murder hobo, quote unquote, behavior. But in this instance, I feel like this can be a very meaningful point for the characters when because you might feel that this is somehow justified, right? You might feel like
Technically, they can't go wrong in
this
that
is
point.
so if
In
you
that
if you
location, they can't go wrong.
so if you have a base urge as a player character here to shoot at some high-ranking members of society who are going to sacrifice some innocent people, as a GM, encourage that maybe, or at least when they do it, paint in detail the scene of what happens.
I would actually like to interject here and try to tie it to the backgrounds. If they have Stasi connections or if they have other political agendas, try to bring those enemies that are perceived by the player characters as a personification and have them actually have that moral dilemma. Like, well, yeah, I don't like them, but would I like to kill them? I know what they're about to do, but like, as you said, the moral dilemma.
So so those are two sort of, and then it's another part that I guess is the location itself. You have this lovely villa on the upper floor, and you have this kitchen, and then you get kind of maybe behind the scenes, the boiler room and the garage and so on when you go down. But then you have the temple itself. And the temple is not just one room, it's really like 3 rooms with like an increasing level of menace and reveal, which is quite well constructed. So you start out in this kind of pre-temple lounge room that has polished skulls with paintings on them and an open fire, or like what's it called? A
Brazier
fireplace. Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. A brazier, and these comfortable sofas where you sit with these skulls that are, of course, absolutely genuine human skulls.
And the girl from Ipanema plays in the background.
Exactly. It's like really, really, I mean, regardless of how you enter this, if you're like sneaking in here, or if you're breaking your way in, or if you're scouting the location before, or if you're, shown this by someone, or if you infiltrate, in any case, awful. And then you go into the temple, which is sort of this outfitted magical temple that's very ornate and, quite beautiful. It has these, magical tools. And that's another, you're ramping up the level. And then you come to the inner sanctum, which is the real temple, which is just grimy and raw concrete and this altar in the middle where there are again skulls, but not nicely polished skulls, but skulls that are just sitting there and rats are eating away flesh from them. And it's all very, very awful. And just that location itself, I think, is quite powerful, probably regardless of how you introduce it.
I think it is a location of duality. You have, forest, wilderness, Gaia, and you have organized construction, Elysium, or Metropolis, if you want to. Organization. You have the high class. You have the beautiful mansion upstairs. You have the ritual temple downstairs. You have people pretending to be something in society. You have them be something abhorrent here in this place. This theme is always nice to maintain, and keeping that up for the player characters as well. There is the incentive, just as you mentioned earlier. There are people also being sacrificed that evening, and they're part of that program, of that ritual that everybody else anticipates to be happening. Um, I'm not actually sure if I did that or if it was like a side scene, because that episode was quite intense. But I would say it is not unlikely that one of those prisoners would try to escape. And why not make it an encounter for, especially if you have people that are more emotionally or academically bound, have an encounter where they run towards the fence and the player characters just went over it, or they kind of went into the property, and this man is or woman is screaming to help them, and well, what do they do? Like, they're probably poorly dressed, they want to escape, but the player characters want to infiltrate. If they're noticing that that victim is missing, well, they're going to launch a full investigation. So somebody needs to be found. They cannot be absent, but you can have that moral dilemma, that you have that conversation of what is happening. And then leading into that house, basically, what is happening then is, I feel like in general, there should be minimum 2 episodes, because you want some time to kind of have for the infiltration. You want to have time for the ritual itself to describe what the players do actually, and in order to propagate towards the building. And then the ramifications and the final ritual and the consequences, they will take time. And especially if the player characters want to explore before the final act of the ritual. Because there is I think, as far as I'm aware, the ritual doesn't specify the timing within the different aspects of the steps of it to be required to be fulfilled. So they could do step 1 and 2, and it could be a day or 2 before they do the last one, as long as they do it in the order intended. But yeah, there will be time to explore on the upper floors. And as you mentioned, upstairs, a beautiful, modern, at least in my head, it's this modern building of avant-garde on anything that is just throwing money at people that don't deserve it, in a sense. And you can have every kind of atrocity already happening up here if you want to incentivize players to go even further. But I do want to ask, without focusing on the ritual here, but once the players entered the pagoda as mentioned, for you, Martin, did they explore? Did they proceed directly to encounter, or did they do something completely unexpected, maybe.
Yeah. So the way
Given
the
that,
way
given that you had a different setup in the whole premise that we might need to recap a bit. Maybe start with
Yes,
that.
yes, yes, yes. So this group of player characters, we or they, I guess, well, we took a slightly different approach than climbing over the fence. So the thing that happened like right before, or the sessions before, was that Philip Kramer got away, but the group managed to successfully, with led by the foreign legionnaire and the Soviet defector agent, they managed to subdue and capture Sasha Pogodin and Anton Mahler when they were having a wee dram, drinking some whiskey, and arguing about whether Philip could be trusted and what all this meant. Player characters storm in and through a number of really quite successful roles, managed to capture these two very dangerous gentlemen. What happened then was this nasty scene where Mahler and Pogodin were kept captive in one of the player characters' basements. Some other things happened that we may or may not return to, but at the end of these proceedings, Anton Mahler, being the hard bastard that he is, he decides to remain stoic and say and do nothing and just wait for his opportunity to break away. Whereas Sasha Pogodin realizes from listening to the player characters talk that, you want Philip Kramer, don't you? Because at this point, the characters are convinced that Kramer is the big wizard or the main bad guy, which he is. But I think they also slightly underestimated just how bad Anton and Sasha, or Mahler and Pogodin, actually are. At any rate, they managed to strike a deal with Pogodin. He is, of course, at any point sort of thinking about how to backstab them. But where they would pretend that everything is fine at the event. Yeah, Herr Mahler is a little bit out of sorts, but he will be here later in the evening. We're waiting for her Kramer to arrive, and in the meantime, please enjoy the drinks and refreshments. And by the way, here are my two new bodyguards. Of course, he didn't say that, but while he was speaking, two of the player characters were constantly by his side, pretending to be the new bodyguards. And two player characters were hiding outside the temple in the basement. So this means that this group started out by actually going through the mansion and looking and sort of getting a view of everything in there and seeing, all the things that we described, and somehow still managed to be surprised when the prisoners showed up, because they never actually checked the place where they were hiding or where they were hidden, which worked out good for me. But of course, if they had found the prisoners earlier, they would have had that reveal and probably a big scene there instead. So yes, they got quite some time to explore the building at leisure, and they actually, speaking of moral dilemmas, they managed to avoid killing and injuring a bunch of poor security guards, because they rightfully felt that the guards really had not that much to do with this, and it was better to send a few of them home and just replace them, which they did. So infiltration relatively successful, I suppose.
That is quite interesting, yeah. I do think that is a good alternative to the action-laden kind of campaign, the backbone that might be still kind of going through it. Um, and I think always in the idea of most, I mean, we both have an occultist book dealer, or like we have academics in the group, and it's very likely that you have not the tank and the massive mercenary in your group, but they're more rather the quiet people. And why not? That is a beautiful idea. If you can get a maybe not even if you don't capture the Russians, but if you can get a grip on the security services, you manage to get on their rotation, you are free because somebody else got their pills mixed up and had to take a day off, and you take over their shift.
Yeah.
Um, and I think incentivizing options for that is great because leaving the players the option to kind of explore in an official capacity is much more interesting narratively, I think, than to have this whole cloak and dagger, which can work too. It's maybe not for me, but it is a great idea to kind of then bring in elements that you want to have. And I mentioned before, I think in my case, I added a few elements of well, I think there was an office, and in the office they had evidence of the surveillance on the player characters that he had kind of on a wall of wool and connection and red threads. He had pictures of their families and so forth. Anything that would incentivize them to be more radical in their confrontation. Anything that would lead them to be just that tad more aggressive. And I think that was for me the most important thing in the main mansion aspect.
It does narratively make sense because at this point, I mean, Mahler, Pogodin, and Kramer seem to be they are quite obsessed by the player characters, right? So that it makes sense to have a big conspiracy board type of deal there.
And Blobel
Mr.
would
Blobel
provide
has,
yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
he's gathered a lot of stuff on them by now. We actually had in one later point, like a little bit of a confrontation with Blobel where he was sort of at some point bragging about this, like how much he knew about them and so on. Um,
Oh, the cockiness before the downfall.
yes, yes. He was also angry that he didn't know as much as he wanted about a particular player character, but that's yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that I think anything particular about the mansion as a room, as a location or point that you would stress that is kind of interesting or might be utilized for the player
Yeah, I
character?
guess we both forgot at some point that there was a helicopter pad there. I don't think I ever
Exactly.
mentioned that in the game at all. And I guess if you have a particularly action focused situation where everything goes to hell in a handbasket at the end, maybe one of the characters knows how to pilot a helicopter, and maybe that's an interesting way to get out of there if you want that. But another interesting detail that I didn't use, but someone might use. I mean, Pogodin has a bunch of staff there who aren't security guards as well. He has his like secretary Eliza, I think,
Oh,
and like
right. Yes,
a
yes, yes, yes.
cook and so on. And we completely ignored that. I think we said that Eliza, went home before this whole thing. But that could also be interesting, putting more sort of potential innocence question mark in harm's way um, if something drastic happens.
I do want to give a quick spoiler here, but I do. Well, one of my player characters, as a consequence of the actions downstairs, broke, and well, they went on a rampage, and they killed anyone and everything within their line of sight, and that was a beautiful moment once they kind of like calmed down and kind of came back to reality and understood what they have done. But yes, leaving the option for innocent bystanders is important. And as you said, security guards, they are just doing a job. They're getting paid for this. They maybe don't even want to be here. they're getting paid quite well. If you also want, I guess one of the options would be if they haven't, or if you have, if you think you haven't brought in enough already precursors for the connection to the right-wing fascist parties, some of the members of the security could be wearing tattoos that are indicative of their association. They could be having, you know, emblems, business cards, or anything that would connect them to either the Toxic Cafe or the Hermanische Gemeinschaft that would already give them some sort of idea. If the players would overtake some security guard and they put on their suit, well, oh, they find Hermanische Gemeinschaft or Toxic Cafe business card in their pockets. Why not? I think again, I do want to stress these elements because bringing in these connections will ease the kind of further elements of the story much more significantly, rather than to interject them as this just happens. And it feels more rewarding to the players. They're like, oh, I found this business card. And later on, they're like, oh, wait a second. Um, I think that is one of the parts. But yeah, having flushed this out, maybe we flushed out the upstairs. The downstairs you already established as well. There we have the recreation room, we have the temple, and the inner sanctuary. Um, when they kind of descend into the madness, did you? How was your kind of description and your players' reaction to that? Did you ask them to roll for keep it together, or were they expecting this sort of violence or imagery that was there?
So I can't remember exactly in what order things happened, but again, not a big surprise maybe. We also had two characters who broke in the aftermath of the ritual, and I'm sure that they dropped some stability on the way there as well, probably when first confronted with the inner sanctum. Yes, I think I asked for a keep it together role when you're starting to feel this sort of aggressive energy that is described from these symbols on the ground, which of course correspond to a rough map of Pogodin's Kalenko's mansion in Petersburg, though of course no one knows this at that time. Not even apparently the three Russians themselves know what these symbols mean. They just know that they feel powerful. I think that was probably there that there was some keep it together role. And potentially, I think also when being confronted with the first potential victim, a young man who was being led to the slaughter, as it were. Don't worry, he was okay in the end, I think.
Maybe.
They kind of left him behind eventually, but at least they rescued him for the immediate sacrifice.
There is a bit of an aftermath that feels a bit blurry and can feel blurry. And I think before we go into the aftermath, before we even go to understand what is happening downstairs, um, I think we both agreed to kind of wind back and kind of start maybe from the get-go, because this is the moment when a ritual is performed by the player characters that they found at the bedside of Magda Oliver's Berlin apartment. That was a book written by Philip Kramer about the uh, power of dreams or something. And it describes this one of the longest handouts that I've probably seen for Kult in general, um, about a very specific way to invoke or to cancel out a dream curse.
Yes.
Exactly what is the curse? And I know listeners, we've talked about the curse in various aspects before. but re-listening to it and also by some questions of the audience, we've decided to kind of go on that ritual and the curse itself again. So, Martin, can you talk us through what is that curse? What is that ritual, and how are they connected?
Yes. Perhaps we should start with the curse, and we don't actually know from the book the exact details of how it is inflicted. But of course, we can fill in the blanks a little bit. And at a later point in the game, I actually did fill in the blanks for our version and actually wrote out a rough version of the ritual that could be found later in among Philip Kramer's notes. But that's neither here nor there. That's not canon, of course. But what we know about the ritual that inflicts the dream curse is that it is some type of dream operation where a magician finds this parasite that is it comes from the dream, but it has effects on both soul and body, I suppose. That is somehow transferred to the victim through dreams. And as the victim is gradually weakened, the magician sort of strengthened in proportion to that. And the ritual can be, or I think probably was, applied like several times to sort of make it worse. That's what we learn from the description in this handout. I find it very interesting, and maybe that is reflective of Shagidiel's influence, that Philip Kramer writes a ritual as an antidote or as a revenge to sort of break a curse that's been put on someone, but he does not actually write out the ritual for putting the curse on someone. Maybe he wants to keep that secret for himself. I don't know.
I did quickly look up, and the only reference that we have to how the curse goes upon Magda is in her diary entries in the Berlin apartment from the 2nd of February 1991, played along with an occult ritual at SA last night, totally harmless. But I still got nightmares afterwards. Shadows, trapped, cold, like something I remember, but I couldn't picture it. Woke up at 4 and rose. It's snowing. That is the only reference that we get that Magda potentially might have been affected by the curse at that ritual. We don't know exactly what it was that happened and how it happened, who was involved. Gives us a lot of freedom, but it also gives us a lot of uncomfortable questions to answer for the player characters if they actually do ask those questions.
Yes, 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 and the ritual that we encounter then in Magda's apartment and in Philip's book is the counter curse, or the way to supposedly break the curse and deflect the punishment back on the one who hurt you or the ones that hurt you. But injected in this ritual are these calls where, well, Shagidiel is called out by name and really told to incarnate, right? And that's actually what the ritual does. So the ritual is part of the big sneaky plan. It's all a scam. It will not heal you or deflect the curse. What it will do is it will allow the incarnates to break free from the bodies of Kramer, Godin, and Mahler.
Now, let me be a cheeky devil's advocate and say my player characters are educated in the occult. They created this very sophisticated occult background character. And if they see the curse and they read Chigdigil, wouldn't they know that? How do you deal with that?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, right? Because I thought exactly that, and I was sort of sitting and waiting.
We all did, I think.
for them to sort of, put these pieces into Google Translate and figure out whether they are real Latin or not. and sort of identify the name of the higher power, which of course out of character at least 2 out of 4 players know. But they didn't actually, and I think it is in, because if the group, for some in or out of character reason, it doesn't really matter. If they absolutely refuse to go along with this ruse, it's like, no, we are not going to do the ritual. I'm not sure what they would do instead. My assumption would be that they would rush to just, capturing and or somehow attacking the Philip, like the 3 Russians themselves. At least in the group, there was some discussions where some of the more violent characters were like, we just need revenge at this point. And someone else would like pull them back and say, no, 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 we want to keep them alive so that we can do the ritual.
I guess there's also one thing to mention here. I 100% agree. And the other thing is, if they don't want to go along, we do have Dr. Richter, who will tell them the progression of their disease. It's inevitable, it's incurable. And I definitely added some handouts that I created about, Russian soldiers and their diaries, how they progress under the disease during war. So, like, not even the best times in their lives, and how they kind of miserably died at the end. And I think, I'm not sure if it convinced my players. It certainly shaped their incentive of, like, we don't trust that ritual. But from all what we know, from all what we understand, it's the one thing that we can rely upon right now, and we need to try it. But again, devil's advocate, what if you research Chigdigil at that point? Because we spoke about, doing all the research in Berlin and so forth. What if you research Chigdigil as an occultist, as a background in the cult mythos universe? What information would you give or get as a player?
And in the book, there are some suggestions, and they are quite meager. It's like the name of a demon somewhere far away, right?
Okay.
Which is also an interesting thing, because a lot of course, the names that are used in the cult mythology are just Hebrew words that we are hopelessly mispronouncing here, that just come straight out of Kabbalah.
Yeah.
So somehow in the cult universe, where Kabbalah is partially a really insightful system that really is to some extent more true than a lot of other things that in other religions, not that in the cult universe, none of human beliefs are like really true. At the same time, it can't really exist there, because like when you research these names, most of the time you don't get Kabbalah. I don't know. I think the answer to that is you should probably never actually put the names of the higher powers in the scenario, and later scenarios don't really do that much. But the Black Madonna does. So I didn't have where they sort of I didn't have that they reacted so much to the name in the incantations in the ritual, but they did run into the name, and they did research it, and they did learn some, useful information about the awful blood-soaked patriarch who is a demon prince from hell, and can possess people, and can, set evil schemes in motion in our world, and so on, according to certain writers. So they basically learn. I think you can basically tell them the truth, just in not so many words.
I do have to admit a bit of a spoiler here in my second run. My player characters have now also, while in a certain apartment, saw or seen a number of occult books. And one of the books they picked out, just by accident, was the Ars Goetia. And I just left it with that. I explained, well, it's a book of 71 demons of hell or whatever. I'm not quite sure the number exactly, but I feel like 71 or something is a good number. And that was the moment where I thought that little information about like occult, like Ars Goetia is a common demonology book. No, it actually changed their behavior. They were like, oh, wait, what? Demons of hell, there's things going on in our life that whoa. And so I think I agree with you on that point. Researching Chigdigil should lead to information that is close and good enough, but leaves room for interpretation, leaves room for understanding that there might be not everything to it. And I think for the kind of curse itself, it is also if they tried to, one of the questions that I got recently was, why did Magda get the curse? Well, um, Martin, why did Magda get the curse?
So I think, and also going from our previous discussions, I think we kind of agreed on this. I think it only really makes this whole thing really makes sense only if this is a kind of a long game that Chagidiel is playing. So this has to be sort of planned from the beginning that Magda should spread it to these particular people, because otherwise we would have to imagine a reason for why Magda doesn't accidentally spread it to the entire dinner there. And I guess there we have a different type of more World War Z like scenario on our hands potentially. But I think Magda has to be a tool to spread it to these particular people, because Chadigil thinks that feels somehow that they are good pawns for this game, for letting the Incarnates loose on the world. And in my head canon, I think that there is also some kind of resentment of Magda personally because of this Incarnate of Bina history. I think.
What do you mean?
So the last time in Leningrad, 1941 to 1943, when Chagdigil tried to bring hell onto Earth by means of his incarnate Ivan Pogodin. See our second episode, I guess.
Exactly, yeah.
An in-depth discussion of the machinations
background.
There. But what happened in the end, that Magda, at that time a little unfortunate girl in this orphanage, became an incarnate of Bina, of the Black Madonna, and fought off or helped fight off Chagidiel. And it all would have worked if it hadn't been for the fact that Demon Nestorov is a human, and he rescued the children, and with them allowed the three incarnates to sneak out. So now Magda doesn't remember any of this. The three boys that carry the incarnates who are now growing into these men, they also don't remember any of this. But in my head canon, I think that some of this awful tension between them, the fact that they can't live together, they can't live apart, really. The three men, they try to
reflective
kill
in Magda's and Felix relationship.
Exactly, their on and off relationship, and Philip kills her husband, but at the same time he cannot have a healthy relationship with her.
Yeah,
exactly. So I'm sort of imagining this at a sort of micro scale, and this is an interpretation I've just come to while sort of playing it. On a micro scale, this is sort of illustrating this is reflecting the bigger conflict in a way. And I think the reason that both the men and the Death Angel choose to spread the curse through Magda is some type of petty, nasty revenge for her role in bringing down the plan the
Oh,
first time. That's my take.
oh,
I don't know if it's
that's
correct, but that's my take.
that is actually nice. I do. You see, this is something that I would say makes me understand, and also her Magda's maybe desperate attempts of seeking help beside the Russians, because
That's true.
we talked about that at the same time. Felix and Magda technically are back together if we go by the timetables. And so in my understanding, the Russians are now hovering over Magda because mainly Felix is involved with Magda. He finally got back with her. After all these years, he's now in a relationship that he always dreamed of. But now Magda gets sick. He doesn't know why. I don't know. I don't think he does know why.
No.
He just sees her deteriorating, and he is desperate to keep her alive. And he is an occultist. He is a magician. He wants to do the best he can, so he will stick with her. But the other two, as you mentioned rightfully in one of our other episodes, they see Kramer as kind of the loose cannon. If anything brings down their empire, it will be fucking Kramer because he's the one who's dealing with drugs and whatnot, and he's always bringing in trouble. And I think that's how I played the other two as well. Like they were like, "Oh, God damn it, Kramer, not you again." And that's when we have this moment where Magda gets infected in February of 91. I think it works with the timeline of she played along with that ritual and it seemed totally harmless. I mean, what better words to put on something that seemed totally harmless but deals upon you certain death. It comes to the point when she understands there's nothing she can do, so she reaches out to people she trusts. Maybe she thinks are not involved in that realm of her influence, of these Russians that she deems so close to her. Because I think we discussed her relationship as well before. It is a love-hate relationship. It is a means to an end because she has nobody else to rely upon. She is a technically upper middle class woman in Germany who got enough money through publishing, has good connections, but after all, she doesn't really have any friends besides the three Russians and Irene Adler and the player characters. And that's when when she calls them in and asks them for help, and that's when everything trickles down. And
Yeah.
upon her death, they find the anti-curse written by Felix Kramer, which they don't really know much about at that point. And, well, I think at that point, what does the anti-curse do? How does it work? Because we talked about Forgotten's Mansion and its particular Fort Knox structure. Why is it so important regarding the anti-curse?
And I think this might also be one of the reasons why you might want, as a player, to have your character go through with this, even if it is a little shady, because it is such a massively weird and evocative handout, right? This ritual description, where you have these 3 stages where you need all these tools. You need like ash and black sand, and you need blood from someone who is infected by the curse, and you need blood from someone who is not, and you are supposed to walk first a big circle around, well, the whole compound, really. You can walk a circle outside of the gate, or outside the gates in the forest, I think, and it's still fine. And then you need to walk a circle that's closer, which is effectively going to be around the house. And then finally, you need to break into the temple where the magicians that have harmed you are at their strongest under the new moon, I think. And you need to walk a circle around them. And in each circle, you need to spread these different things, and you need to chant these different elements. So it's a very elaborate thing that's going to take hours to perform. I hope it even was made a little bit more attractive. We had one character who had Dabbler in the Occult as an advantage. So of course I added the requirement that at the end you roll Dabbler in the Occult. So he actually got to use his advantage there. And maybe that is out of character reason to further incentivize doing this, because I mean you want to know what it does. But it's a really, and I think it's also a horror role-playing game classic. If you can get players to chant during a session, that's always a good thing.
Oh yes.
Like sort of,
I think I even insisted that the chant only works if they actually speak out the different sections. And I will judge their success by how well they pronounce it. Not that I have any points of merit, but it just made it more enticing, and they felt more tense. Like, okay, so, and tried to chant it. Did you have your players actually, once they found the anticurse, given them enough opportunities or time to research what it truly meant, what it truly means?
I think so. I think there was a little bit of a time crunch. I effectively, once they ran into the date for when the next ritual was going to happen, it was like next Friday or something, which was like end of the week kind of. But yes, they did have some time to hit the occult library advantage and do some other research. And I even had this little side track that actually in the end probably didn't do much. And I don't know if I would do it again, but I had like an alternative version of the ritual that was like a less evolved earlier version in the first edition of the Power of Dreams that they actually ran into. So they actually sat there with two versions of the ritual, one without Shagidiel's name in and one with it, and they decided which one to use, which was the one with Shagidiel's name in it, and so on. But yeah. So I think they had time to sort of think about it and think about if they wanted to try to do something else and have an argument about, but we're dying here. We're desperate. We need to do this. Yeah.
Fantastic. And so the inner, like the outer circle is not really, I think, a big of an issue when it comes to products mentioned.
That's easy mode, I think.
The second one, that is within the premises. How did that go for you? How much complications did you write? You said 2 of them were pretending to be bodyguards, 2 others were hiding out. Yes. So they were already on the compounds. And they were. Yes.
And the 2 bodyguards at some point went and made the outer circle, or one of them did. And that's where, if things had shaken out a little differently, I was ready with Pogodin's attempt at backstabbing, so to speak. But they managed to sort of evade that.
Okay.
But there were actually no complications against the circle making itself. Also because I felt that sort of another guard with a dog sort of walking into them when they were spreading sand or something, and them trying to explain it would have been maybe entertaining, but um,
Conducive
not
to the
really
story. Yeah. Yeah.
thematically,
Yeah.
interesting.
In I guess at that point I have to reveal that in my first run, the players, well, they actually had to climb over fences. It was an electrified fence. It was CCTV monitored in the forest, uh, giving them just enough of like, this thing is highly guarded. But we had an ex-Stasi officer, so like they knew how to temper enough with the equipment to kind of just give them the opportunity window. And that's all I wanted, like just to make it impactful for them. To kind of the outer circle, no issue. The inner circle, well, it's taking guts to do it. And there was actually a beautiful scene where they, well, were deliberating, like, should we all go? Should just some of us go? Should some watch out? Like, what if not all of us perform the ritual? All of us perform the outer part, but if somebody needs to do something while the others perform the second stage, does that impact the ritual? Does it impact the result? And they had this beautiful discussion. So, like, I had all the guards and whatever kind of partially just avoid the routes, or they had, I think, actually, some of the dog treats kind of laced with narcotics or something. So the dogs would get sleepy after a while and just went back to their kennel and just slept. And the guards were occupied getting the dogs up. And so, like, there was like a lot of room for them to continue. Um, but I think it was actually at that point where one of the players didn't participate in the second part of the ritual. Um, because they were saying like, it is more important for me to make sure that we're not disturbed and to create a distraction in case something happens. So they performed the first part. They didn't participate in the second, and they didn't participate in the third one either, which comes to a later discussion point. But so two others of my players continued. They fulfilled the circle, and it was it was tense because I describe every time they need to circle it thrice. The second circle, blah, 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 hold the ball to your left hand, walk the counter sun movement. There's a circle mix. Yeah, so you do that multiple times, and every circle they took, I gave them like an act under pressure to see how concentrated were they on their actions? Were they distracted by the party going on there in in the mansion, the excessive abuse and whatever is going on in there? Or were they focused on their actions? And it was great that they split up at that point because in the long run it had consequences for the whole campaign. And finishing the second circle, the players then went into the mansion, like basically turned in, and there was some bloodshed, and security guards were unfortunately killed. But that's when they kind of confide into the third circle. Um, Coming from the second part, and you described they were part of the agenda of the evening. What happened after for you?
Yeah, so I think what you're describing is the tension and the challenge, which I mean, there should probably be a couple of roles in there. I think a little bit of mechanical, get people to allow people to use their advantages and so on and play to the character strength. They should happen at some stage, right? And I think in our case, a lot of that had happened in the planning and sort of maneuvering to get into the play that in the first place. So the first circles were relatively easy to do, and then the big confrontation, I guess, was all about the third circle. Once, you know, they waited for Philip Kramer to arrive, so everyone would be in there. Then they sort of sort of did things, and then eventually at the end they need to sort of fight Philip. They've already dealt with Mahler and Sasha Pogodin. They need to sort of fight Philip Kramer to get him into the inner sanctum and to be able to draw a circle around all three of them. And that's where sort of a bit of combat ensued
So
in
were
my case.
Mahler and Pogodin willing participants in the third circle? Because technically, what
No.
I understood, they were kind of mingling, and they still need to be within the circle.
Yes, yes. So they were mingling. Well, Mahler was not. Mahler was prisoner all the time because he would not collaborate at all. Pogodin was, well, I guess I should describe it more correctly. They ended up having to subdue both Kramer and Pogodin at the end, because Pogodin was willing to participate but not willing once, he was not willing to step into some occult ritual where he
Mm-hmm.
is the sort of sacrificial lamb, if you will. But they ended up sort of they were like a big group ganging up on him, right? And then at the end, Philip comes in. And that was a little bit more of a fair fight. Philip was armed and so on.
Hmm.
Um,
Interesting.
as of course I expect him to be. But at the end, you end up with all three of them sort of piled up in the middle of the room.
Of the inner sanctum.
Yes, and the door closed so that they mentioned that everything is like soundproofed around the temple, right? Just a nice touch.
Given the bodies and corpses in
Exactly.
this room.
But note all the guests still upstairs and expecting to be able to get into their the leisure room and get sort of started with the ritual any minute, and wondering probably very soon, where did our hosts go? So there was a bit of a timer on everything here. Yeah, how was the third circle in your case?
It was so I made it relatively simple because a lot of the action has been spent on kind of their infiltration of Pogodon's mansion. Again, they were not as sneaky. They kind of literally jumped the fence. They kind of infiltrated the house. They subdued two of the guards and one of the guests in order to take on their clothes, in order to kind of mingle with everybody, to blend in. And then they kind of realized the atrocities happening here, the wild sex orgies in various of the rooms and the pools. And, it is the super rich doing the super rich stuff, unobserved by the public. And so the moment they kind of went down, there was just like a brief tail end of Marla and Pogodin kind of discussing something before they kind of went into the temple and then into the inner sanctum by a few of the bodyguards bringing in one of the victims for the pleasures of the people. And, there were enough of the high and rich and powerful around that they were like, oh, we're soon to be indicted, and we can't anticipate the excitement and whatnot. It's going to be marvelous. I heard it's life-changing beyond just the understanding of death. I can't. And well, they heard all of this and they were like, "Fuck you! You're fucking weird." And they stormed in. They quickly subdued one of the guards in the rooms, and they pretty much just like tackled everyone into the inner sanctum. And it felt for them like it was a success to like, oh, you managed to kind of wait out the moment where everybody was in the right place and you just smushed them into this one room. And once everybody was in there, it was just like three Russians facing my three-player characters, and the Russians looked at them frightened and like, Jesus fuck. And there was just this moment of stalemate of like, what do we do now? And the Russians just became frightened. And even Philip Kramer was like trying to approach him. Listen, um, we can make a deal. We don't have to resolve the. And he took out his gun, put it to the ground. It's like, listen, we can talk about this. And my players were so enraged. They were so furious. And they kind of, two of them started to circle while the third one, who didn't participate, held basically them at gunpoint. And it was this tense situation. And it was this feeling for the players, I hope, that was like exactly that. They felt they were in absolute control of the situation. They have been the ones managing to get everybody down here. They were the ones that confined them to this room. They were the ones that are now circling them, calling up that ritual as they circling them while somebody has them at gunpoint. The Russians were, hey, listen, we're pleading. We're trying to get, and they're kind of backing off. And the moment they kind of started to circle, I had elements of the ritual set in face. Suddenly, like one of their arms breaks and kind of just twists unnaturally. They fall to the ground like scars and nets or appear in their body, rattling of chains and kind of the illusion starting to crumble around them. And it was this marvelous moment when they took the second. I think you need to take 3 turns, and the second turn, the two characters doing the circle were like stopping for that brief moment, like, are we doing the right thing here? Something seems weird about this. And I was like, there's a noise you can hear from the background, and like easing the tension. Oh, no, we need to continue. And they did. And it was so beautifully timed. I honestly, I did little to kind of incentivize them, but like the idea that they felt they were in control the whole time was just what I wanted them to feel. And I don't know how to convey this, but it is very situational. So give the players enough leverage to advance, but make it, just that bit of a resistance here and there. Not everything works, but good enough. You subdue a god, but he's still conscious enough. Decision, moral. Do you kill him? Do you knock him unconscious? That was my third circle. How was yours?
Yeah, they at this point they have them all sort of unconscious, really, in the middle there, in a big pile by the altar. And of course, while they are doing this, it's described a little bit in this. So the book now, reader, you know this already. You probably read the whole chapter, right? But here comes the first big like horror set piece of the campaign, in a way. And I guess why we are so we and the writers are so excited to get the player characters here, because we really wanted to describe this part, right? And it talks a little bit about these, bodies that are screaming despite them being dead and all this very culty stuff. And just a little bit like you said, I had these things start happening as well, like the sort of these unconscious men start sort of moving in an unnatural way, and they start like mumbling in a language that none of them understand, which is of course then the language of the Black Bible that Kalenko's family has, though we don't know that. It's just weirdness at this point. And you can hear Yelena, Alyona, and Katya coming in a distance, through the walls, that kind of thing. And then the walls disappear, and the three Nepharites really step into the scene, or at least in my case. And I guess you can. I think you should add any description that you really like and that sort of creeps you out here. And also, ideally, if you've had dark dreams, you've had earlier visions, right? If there's any foreshadowing and symbols you can use, you should use those, right? I've had this mumbled secret language already, and I had sort of unconscious bodies moving in unnatural ways and kind of bulging like something is trying to come out of them, that kind of thing. So of course I'm going to reuse that for the big set piece. Yes, and then the Nepharites come to collect the souls of the bodies. Yes, the souls and the bodies, and the Incarnates step out of the remnants. The very 1990s cult gory scene with chains and hooks and all that stuff.
I definitely would recommend Hellraiser. Watch it again just before
key media rec here. Yes.
Yeah, it is just. I don't know how else to describe it, but to just watch the movie and make your own verbal reference to what you've seen happening there. I think it's the best, and it doesn't have. If you don't want it that brutal, you can make it seem much more appropriate. It is a metamorphosis, a change of the bodies. There's nothing worse than expecting something awful and then to be beautiful in its change. I mean, obviously my players witnessed these three Russians crawling in fetal position to the ground until their skin kind of turned inside out, and it was this awful bloody scene they've witnessed. But there's nothing against the rules that you can say, like, there's a beautiful light engulfing you, and you see stepping out a changed, beautiful human walking towards you, engulfing from the remnants, the shards of this vessel.
Yeah. No, exactly. You can make it classy if you want, right? And I mean, we had the version of the Incarnate who looks like the old Ivan Pogodin, kind of showing up, like it's described in the book, naked and, slightly overweight, middle-aged man, not looking too impressive, and sort of stepping out there and, touching your forehead, and you're like, you don't want him to touch you, right? And then just sort of walking out of existence, sort of. Of course, you could, if you wanted, have him show up, in his old-timey suit and place some sort of Leningrad 1940s references there if you wanted to. That would also work really well, I think.
But there's something about the slimy, grimy existence of a naked body of an overweight man touching your forehead.
Yeah, I mean, I like the idea of like a middle-aged naked man with a pouch. I think there is something culty about, male full frontal nudity.
Yes, yes.
That isn't so hot in a way.
Yeah, it is just like the off-putting part of it that you don't want to see.
And then the Nepharites come, and if you thought for a we already know that this game is mildly inspired by Hellraiser and the writings of Clive Barker, but just look at the lines that are given to the Nepharites here. It's a beautiful homage, I think.
It is indeed.
I had them say a few other things. and try to reveal a little bit that they feel conflicted about it, sort of, and even threw in a mention of the children without explaining it. But again, I'm very heavy-handed with the foreshadowing, because I feel like there's nothing you can't be too heavy-handed when the material is this complicated. But again, that is optional, I think.
I think let's talk about the Nepharites a bit more in detail.
Oh yes, I love them. I love them so much.
It is the sound of three Nepharites coming closer to knock at the walls of this place, to this existence. And I think it is one of the biggest Hellraiser scenes that we described earlier. From your experience, maybe we start with that. Any particular ideas, suggestions, methodology for GMs to kind of pick up?
So the three Nepharites, I mean, they are a lot. They all have a bit of the description in common, but they all have their own awful, deadly wounds on them and so on. And even though my first impulse is always I want to describe all of that in as much detail as possible, I think that's going to ruin the pacing a little bit here. So you probably want to give like a sort of overall gestalt of them and maybe focus on a few things and on Aliona, the youngest one, who is sort of their leader for the first interaction. And then later when they come, they will probably show up individually at some points because they're going to end up stalking individual characters. And later in groups, then you can describe more of them. I love the pictures in the like the artwork in the book. It's, I think at this point, except for the chapter opening art where we see someone who is Magda, I guess. I think this is the first like real character portraits that we get in the campaign. There are more later, but I think these are the first ones.
These are the first ones that make an impact to both the GM, I think, and the player.
Yeah.
They're vivid.
Yeah, they're good enough that maybe you want to show them. I don't know.
I think you should. I think if you have the Foundry module, they're now available easily. Otherwise, I think it's worth an effort to kind of just crop them, copy them, and hand them to your players. Because it would save time and you can focus on the narrative, the interaction that they actually bring to the table. Because once the final circle, the third circle, is completed, well, the three Russians that we know as Anton Mahler, Sasha Pogoldin, and Felix Kramer, well, cease to exist, at least in this plane of existence. And what happens to them the moment the ritual is complete? And maybe give us a bit of a spiel here of how you described the ending of that ritual.
Yeah, so my version, I guess, content warning for a strange choice of descriptions is this motion of the body being turned inside out that we're trying to do here. You could describe it in various ways, and I had actually foreshadowed it a little bit in certain ways in nightmares and so on. So I describe it as sort of turning a glove inside out when you're like taking it off your hand. And that sounds very silly, but I kind of find that sort of like these mundane descriptions work really well in amongst all of this. So you sort of have to imagine how you're peeling a glove off your hand and you're turning it inside out, and all the stuff that normally is found inside of the body is suddenly outside of the body. And maybe it looks a little bit like this otherworldly flower that is about to about to burst into bloom. And then, of course, player characters at this point showered in all kinds of parts of these characters, and we have a series of keep it together roles. I think at least 2 of them are mandated as part of the set piece.
I do have to interject here and ask a question. So, regarding the keep it together roles, do you think they're strictly necessary, or do you think they are incentivizing just for stability loss?
Yeah, I mean they I would say
Let me phrase it differently. Are they meant to just make the character broken to incentivize other actions of the characters, or are they actually narratively enhancing the character's development?
I think you could make a case for unless we have player characters who have gone really deep already, and become a bit desensitized, which is possible.
It's
You never
possible.
know.
If
You
they've
could
gone
make
to
the
the
Kens,
if they've gone to various locations, yeah.
yeah, or even if they have, say, found themselves going on some sort of righteous murderer spree to get into the temple, and are now suddenly contemplating their moral decisions while covered in
Well,
Slavic Association
I think
members'
the moment they kill the first, then
blood.
they should have consequences from their action of
Yes,
killing
yes.
somebody.
But I think, regardless, you could argue that you should just spring for the GMO move of reducing stability, right? Just sort of mechanically, and get it over
That's
with.
that's what I was kind of going for.
I must say, I mean, I was selected on this, but at this point, I think a role actually can also be exciting. So if we, a lot of the time, I'm not a big mechanics person, but at this stage, 3 out of 4 of the characters in my game were really sitting at 1 to 2 stability from broken. And of course, at that point, you can go, okay, you lose 2, you all 3 break. But it is probably even more exciting to sort of, get a little randomness there. And in the end, only 2 of them broke during this procedure.
So when you say broke, is that the moment the 3 Russians turn inside out, or is it the Nepharites arriving? Because I think from the narrative we have the Russians turning inside out and the Nepharites arriving kind of at the same time, but they're 2 different roles that are happening consecutively.
I think, let's see. I think the way it's written, it sort of says 1 for weird things that start to happen during the ritual, I think, and 1 for the moment when the big gore happens. And potentially 1 before, when you see the scene victims suffering.
Yeah, they must succeed and keep it together to avoid becoming sick when they kind of come in. And slowly in the distance, 3 dark shapes appear, must keep it together in order to. And then to avoid shock that the PCs have rolled once again for keep it together in order 3 identical men emerge. So it's,
and I say maybe all of these are a little bit
first, and
yeah, maybe all of these 3 are a little bit redundant. If you've already had 2 keep it together rolls, don't do the 3rd unless you really want to. I think I think the broken in my case happened at the very end, sort of.
I think even so, if you even would follow the suggestion of rolling 3 times, keep it together, I would say if they become broken, just continue with the narrative pace until, the situation resolves, and then have them collapse, because it fits more narratively to what it states, where what happens? 3 identical men emerge, right? And these men that emerge from the Russian bodies after the third part of the ritual is complete, who are these men?
I guess no one at this point really knows. Well, the Nepharites know, but they're not going to stop to explain it, right? um,
Got some business to do.
they have other things to attend to. They are the three incarnates, right? They are I guess the shape that they take is just sort of coincidental. It's a shape they like, I guess, the one they used back in Leningrad. They could probably look any way they wanted, really. Um, but they are not really corporeal yet, so they are able to sort of touch the player characters and mark them, give them Shagidiel's blessing. But then they sort of walk through people and out of the room, and they set off to their different locations to set the next part of the plan in motion. I mean, one goes into the dream. Well, two go into the dream, and one go to the Russian military to starting a coup, I guess.
The coup d'etat, yeah. I do have one question because it happened in my case. As I mentioned earlier, one of my players, didn't want to participate in two-thirds of the ritual, because they thought it would be more helpful if they would wash out, make sure nobody interrupted the others. So now the ritual is complete and the three incarnates rise from these bodies. Would they be equally affected, partially affected, or not affected at all?
I had a similar situation, and my reading and my interpretation is that Gideon's mark really goes to the ones who actively participated. We can discuss what actively participating is. But in my interpretation as well, there was one who did not contribute to walking or chanting at any stage during the ritual, and that character was not marked. Which, of course, leads then to potentially interesting discussions sort of between the player characters, like what happened? Am I cured? Am I not cured?
Why do you have a 6 growing out of your forehead? No, I agree, and it not only leads to a short-term discussion about like what the fuck just happened, but a long-term consequence throughout the campaign that later will have ramifications, because certain players with the mark will not see certain things.
It says at a lot of stages in the campaign, it says characters with the mark experience this or get this reaction, and others don't.
So it is, I guess, an important point for the GM, if you run this, to make sure to understand who you want to see things later on and who you want to keep in a blissful ignorance of Elysium and Metropolis. Or whatever.
And potentially, if you want to make things easier for you, maybe put it on all of them. The same goes for the curse. I think you could imagine a situation where the campaign is written, where you get someone who is not touched by Magda at the banquet, and you might decide that means that they actually don't have the curse.
You know what? That's actually an interesting premise, because I don't think the contingency has. We even discussed the contingency if one of the players would not touch Magda. Would there be any?
It is worth.
Yeah, go. No.
It is worth thinking about, how much more difficult does that make your life, and maybe if you want to go for that, you should make sure that there are other incentives for them to actually engage with the material. But I think it could totally work.
What would you say would be the prime beats that they still need to meet if they are not infected?
My thinking is that someone who is not infected needs to be either very close to Magda, so that they really care, so that they really care about her. They probably need to have a relationship that is sort of meaningful with one of the ones who is ill as well, I think.
Yeah.
But it also depends. I think it also depends a little bit on out of character considerations. But because if you expect, if you have an out of character understanding that you really want to participate in the Black Madonna, and you're probably not going to go off on your own, then go for that. But if you think that you're going to be very hung up about if one of the player characters is not really hooked in as heavily as the others, and that player is then going to risk feeling left out or something like that, then probably don't do that. I think that's both my main reason for making, saying that everyone gets the curse regardless of whether Magda touches them or not. The fact she tries not to touch them because she feels that she is covered in boils and hideous.
I agree on the curse. Everybody should get the curse. I did have the experience of having one character not having been touched by Chigdigel's mark. And I think it made a difference on how the relationship between the characters, because not only did it change the constellation of perception of the player characters throughout the campaign, but it also made it interesting because if you have Chigdigel's mark, you will see things, you will understand things throughout the campaign much easier, much more intuitively than those who won't.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that those who don't have the mark will not see things and do experience stuff that will affect them. And so I had two of the characters who participated in the full ritual, and they were touched by the Incarnates, and they were like, boop, gotcha, see you next time, and disappeared basically. And one of the characters was like, wait, what? Okay, so I'm cool, right? I'm good, I'm fine. And then she checked herself, and I was like, you still have the boils, you're not cured, you still die. Oh, fuck. Well, what does that do? And throughout the gameplay, they realized it wasn't better or worse, it just gave different information throughout the campaign. And I did like the discontinuity between the characters and amongst themselves, how they exchange information based on that information in itself. It gave a bit of breathing room for me as well, because I was sure that if I would describe something, it could have meant for either of them. And I was just like, just leave it there. And they discuss it out. They interpret the event themselves. It is... I think it needs to be clear that I think there's no rule saying you need to do A, B, C in order to get Chigdigel's mark. But if you do not participate in one of the three stages, I think it's good enough if you're not touched by this demonic embodiment of something and just leave you hanging there.
Yes. And I also, as it sort of turned out for us, I also feel that it makes some sense, because one of the characters who ended up being touched, and was also the one who sort of led the ritual, the occultist, dabbler in the occult. Very soon afterwards, turned from more than a dabbler into a death magician. Who actually, well, tentatively at least, worships Shagidiel. So that's interesting. And the one who was not touched, it turns out, has not been enlightened yet, but has turned out to be bound to a being that has a different death angel as an allegiance. So that also fits together. It was not planned that way, but it sort of works out. So I'm very curious to see how that develops, and yeah, and I guess here we can already start thinking about one of the player characters, if everything goes well, is in the end also going to be the new incarnate of Bina. So who will that be and why? That's worth pondering as well. Maybe not deciding yet. It's too early to decide anything, but
there might
start
be
thinking about.
Yeah, then there might be an incline depending on their kind of soul value if you go by the rulebook.
Yes. If one, say, has soul of +5 already. But we'll see.
Or if he would be just soul of 3 or 4 and he would have the dreamer advantage. It would be a possibility. But yeah, I think so. The point now that emerges is 3 Nepharites appear, and these figures are, well, are they friend or are they foe at that point? Because what they do is they drag these desperate souls of these incarnate, the incarnate vessels, so the 3 Russians, back into their realm. They do not touch the incarnates themselves as they walk into wherever they go to. So maybe we talk a second about these Nepharites. Who are they and why are they here?
This is another awful, cruel irony of the Death Angel, right? Because they are some of the first victims of the original incarnate Ivan Pogodin the first time around. They are the 2 daughters and the wife of Nikolai Kalenko, who were over time gradually abused and sacrificed. And I think I said earlier that in like the first episode that Kult, as you know, this campaign has almost everything awful you can think of, but it doesn't have that many sexual content warnings and sexual abuse content warnings. Here is one. So if you go deep into the backstory here, there is sexual abuse as well. So if you don't want to include that, let's steer clear of that part of the backstory. But at any rate, they are horribly sacrificed at different points by Kalenko and by Pogodin. And they become, then in this horrible irony, they have to work for the Death Angel after being sacrificed to him. So they are not really willing participants in any of these things, but they do them. And they have this big conflict inside them where, beautifully put by the authors, through their interactions with the player characters, they gradually regain a bit of agency and are able to, at the end, maybe participate in helping the player characters make the human decision, maybe at the end.
Whatever that is.
Yes, that's not for us to tell what is right in the end of this mess, right? But at this point, I think it's safe to say that they are not friends, at the very least. In fact, they, by the nature of being a Nepharite, I suppose they are. I mean, they are there to collect the remains of the three Russians, and they are telling the player characters that they will collect their remains soon enough, I suppose, and torture them forever in hell, which is their job.
So, I mean, you mentioned this right now, but how do you portray the Nepharites? And you highlight Alana specifically as their leader, but like this is such an important scene that I think it is worth mentioning how this happens. And obviously, the player characters will most likely ask at least one or two questions.
Yeah.
So, how did you handle that? And yeah, how did you portray the Nepharites to them?
Yeah. And I there are role-playing tips. If we look at the great list of NPCs, there is a little line about how each of the three Nepharites, like a thing you can do to make them distinct.
Supposedly should react.
And I actually did not use that one in this scene, at least maybe later, because it is sort of that Aliona is supposed to be sort of like vulgar to the player characters and sort of some combination of like nasty and childish, I suppose. No, I let them be at this point rather dignified in a way. I made a big deal out of the fact that she talks without a jaw, so she has a very sort of odd voice. And I also made a point of sort of pointing out something that I don't know how to really portray, but that they could sort of feel, the characters who sort of feel that sometimes when she said certain things, she spoke as if the words were kind of dragged out of her, that like there was some sort of like conflict inside her. It was very painful to say these things. Sort of trying to hint at sort of the conflicted nature of them. Again, very heavy-handed, but I'm heavy-handed GM.
So how much did the players interact with her? How much questions did they ask to the Nepharites at that point?
So, I don't really remember. So I don't really remember how much of this was in that very scene and how much of this was a little bit later, when we resolved the broken status of two of the player characters.
That's all good.
They did ask some version of, who are you and what is this? And I don't think I gave them really straight answers to that. But they did truthfully talk a little bit about how we serve the same master now, at least the three of us, not pointing to the one who was not marked, how we will meet again very soon, later once the two broken ones get pulled a little bit closer into Inferno. They get a little bit of a purgatory experience, sort of telling them that this is not your time, you're not supposed to be here now, and we will see each other again in Kalenko's house. So I did a little bit of...
You did mention...
Told them a little bit of true information there. But mostly they were cryptic and menacing.
Okay. Fantastic. I mean, I think I kept it more cryptic and more vague in general. I didn't make heads or tails for my players to make sure they understand anything. And just that it would be their time soon. And that was it.
And this is, I think, a question where one can sort of make a big decision in sort of style in a way. Okay, because we always want to be relatively cryptic. We don't want it to that would be breaking the genre conventions.
How cryptic do we want to be, right?
Exactly. The question is, do we want everything to be like a total enigma, or how far can we push it by telling them true things that still don't make the full picture, but maybe make it sort of, these breadcrumbs that at least when I'm a player, I find that very satisfying when you sort of like can put it together. But of course, as a matter of style, I also don't want a lot of exposition in these situations. Like we want to keep a certain tempo here, because
Yeah,
otherwise it
of
will
course,
just turn, Q&A with the Nepharites. That would be bad. So actually,
I
maybe
think.
not. That would be a fun purgatory Q&A with the
Well,
Nepharites.
oh God. No, but I think you mentioned a good point here. Because as you mentioned earlier, the aftermath, the broken condition, the dealing of the player characters with seeing three Nepharites appearing, turning bodies inside out, dragging them back to infernal hell, whatever. You understand at that moment as a player character as the world is a bit sickening. It might be though interesting though if you postpone some of the information in the sense of the Nepharites give you enough to understand, like, we'll meet again soon, drag the bodies away. You deal with the aftermath, and then everything is good and calm. You portray the aftermath to the point where they go to bed, and then bam, it hits them. It hits them hard. It hits them to the point of like, they see visions of hell, they see purgatory, they see the Nepharites kind of moving in and out of their vision, blurting premonitions, maybe, or ideas into their heads. And it can be both ways because they're still servitudes of Chigdigel, right? We're not, at this stage, we're not sure who they are working for, unless the player characters show incentive in order to free the children to help the lost souls, right?
Yeah, and I think at this point, at least as written, right, the curse is not cured.
It is
So
not.
nightmares are still there.
Oh,
so
yes.
You could definitely have the Nepharites show up in nightmares, right? That legitimately
Yeah.
sounds like a good idea, I think.
And that's where you potentially could just introduce a lot of the narrative in a more calmer sense. So, like, because it's an action-loaded sequence that you have at Pagoda Expansion, the ritual will be enough to deal with, and everything surrounding it. It might be a good idea to defer it to nightmares if the player character, if they don't have the disadvantage yet. What about if they get broken? Choose a new disadvantage. Oh my, they get nightmares. Oh, they go to bed. They roll for nightmares, and there you go. You can introduce more story to them. I do think. No, please.
Go ahead.
Please.
No, go ahead.
No. Please.
I think you said before, someone, and I would agree that it is a good idea for those who reach broken to defer resolving broken until the set piece has ended. And indeed, you could probably sort of hold that until you've left Godin's mansion if you wanted to, because there might be a car escape or something to deal with as well, right? Mundane concerns.
The most disturbing thing I can think of. Once they've dealt with the basement, they go upstairs. There's just bodies everywhere. They find cars idling and whatever. They can take whatever they want. They can take whatever car they want. They can drive off. Nothing is stopping them. There's nothing more disturbing for player characters if there's no obstacle after such a thing, because they're gonna freak the fuck out. They're going upstairs from this to there's a car idling. Everybody around is dead.
Yeah, and as a point of advancing this, because now this is where proverbial matter hits the proverbial fan, in a real way. Um, Regardless of how it happens, we want some type of big disaster at the mansion that the newspapers can later have a
Mm.
field day with. In our case, the characters escape relatively handily. There's a bit of a firefight with Alexei Blobel on the way, but neither here nor
Oh,
there.
you
But
had
then
Babel be at the mansion.
I had him actually set up a roadblock outside of
Oh.
the mansion on the way back.
So was he informed about the character's action to come to the mansion?
He was he was alarmed that there was something going on, but he did not know precisely what.
Hmm.
Um, and then the player characters left, and the next thing they hear about it, there has been a great fire, and that police suspects arson, and then during days, the whole news is revealed, and so on. But you could, of course, the way it's written in the text is it's like the newspapers talk about it as ritual murder and suspect Satanists, like almost immediately, and that would work very well with what you described, right? Like a sort of ghastly murder scene, and so on. Yeah, so some kind of big, terrible explosion, even in Elysium, I guess, is what we want here, and I'm sure many groups of player characters are helpfully going to create the big explosion on their own. They might even set the
Oh.
house on fire when they leave. Who knows?
As I mentioned earlier, like one of my characters went insane just only after everything, and they decided to kill pretty much everyone they saw or met on their way out. Uh, a few of them were the leading editors and publishers for like the major German newspapers and politicians and whatnot. It created a major scandal. Um, Obviously, they were such in such a fugue state and enraged. They didn't care about fingerprints and whatnot. No, they just went for bloodbath, basically. Um, and that came back to haunt them. I mean,
The,
the pool that Pagodin has was blood drenched. Um, I can say that much. Um, it was, I think, the moment the ritual is concluded, the moment the understanding of Chigdigel's mark is being set, the Nepharites appear the first time. What is something that player characters should have as an understanding at that moment, Martin?
I hmm. I actually, my hypothesis, or I think that maybe, and it's what I've gone with, but maybe it's preferable to let the physical manifestations of the mark rest like a while. So you're just left
Mm.
with this feeling dirty. I think the description is that you feel like you've been dipped in dung, which I think is a nice phrasing. I don't think I said that verbatim, but I like the image. And that sort of doesn't go away when you wash yourself, and you still notice that
The smell, the scent,
exactly,
yeah.
and also the boils from the curse don't go away either. Uh, I have a little feeling that the fact that Digiel's mark also manifests a type of nasty body horror, reminiscent, I think, of cancerous growth a bit,
Are we
is
talking about like Cronenberg growth or
yeah. I mean, that's how I think of it, right?
okay?
I think maybe that is a
But
little
only
bit,
visible
yeah,
to the characters, right?
exactly, of course, of course. Oh, and to ones who see a little bit more of
Who
the
see
truth.
each other,
So
yeah.
not to most people. I feel that maybe that is a little bit redundant, and I was considering whether to make the mark more distinct from the Dreamcurse by making it not that type of thing. But then I said, no, let's go with it. It's a very unpleasant image. I find that personally very, very disturbing. It's pretty close to the kind of thing I would put, lines on if I was playing it myself. So let's get into it. But yes, I think at this point you should. I like it. I like it that you understand somehow that the Nepharites consider you as serving the same master as them now. I like that effect. It's not spelled out really like that in the book at this stage, but I like that.
It's kept vague, indeed. It's kept vague to the point that you're not sure if you're on. Well, are you really sure that you're on the same side as the Nepharites until Moscow or Leningrad? You're not.
Probably not.
Yeah,
and even at that point, are you?
Even if you go to Galenko's mansion, you're not quite sure on what side you're on.
Yeah,
because by then you're probably on a different mindset in general.
Are you really going to tell some or allow some creepy dead women to tell you who you're supposed to obey? This is a game about breaking free from illusions after all, so maybe that is all a lie. You never know.
And this, I think, also the point when rolling back to the basement, the first time assuming sleepers or even aware characters, they understand there's a bit of breaking of reality. There's more to it than intended. But this is the first time something supernatural really transpired right into their face. Like, literally smacks them, touches them on their forehead. Like, this is the turning point for any reasonable character, whatever understanding they have of reality, whatever slightest regard of normality they have. That touch changes things.
Yeah, at this point you could have gone through the whole thing like maybe many characters in urban fantasy and supernatural horror games do, pretending that this is all hallucinations and we're told about this ritual, but it's all nonsense. This is the point where you struggle to keep that charade going. I hope. Because if you're this, and also because if you're this deep into the campaign, maybe you should go to the next phase of.
It is crumbling. Yes. The world around you is crumbling. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, mechanically, in our group, everyone was at this point at the cusp of enlightenment, anyways, because of the advancement track. But that's a discussion for a different episode, I guess.
It is, and it is intriguing to kind of see that you were almost about enlightenment when I had that several episodes from then. But so from Pogodin's mansion, the infiltration, the ritual in itself, and the basement kind of ordeal. What are some key takeaways that you would say are important to consider before even approaching Pogodin's mansion?
I think it's worth thinking about what we've just discussed now, about what perception of the supernatural powers at play will the characters have when this is over. If they are completely confused and don't understand anything, I think that is okay, because very soon Ivan Chesenko is going to run into the picture like a raging bull, beat them up and tell them what's what. But it might be more satisfying if they have already gotten enough clues and enough understanding so that they can piece together a lot of what's going on. And of course, all of that is not going to happen at Pagodin's mansion, but I think some key things are in the interactions
Yeah.
with the Nepharites and
Yeah.
things that this might be the first time you really get a chance to talk to Mahler, Pogodin, and Kramer. Maybe you don't want to let them
Even
talk too
as
much, but just a
brief,
little
yeah,
bit.
even as brief as they talk, that's the more chance you have.
Yeah. So I think that's worth thinking about. And then I think it's worth, because this is a big set piece, and I think this is partly why we play the Black Madonna, because we want to experience these nasty tableaux that they wrote in 1990, right? And the text of the set piece and the events at the ritual, it's quite long. It's like several
Yeah.
pages really of description. So it is worth reading them through, and probably it is worth to do the thing that I am sometimes otherwise hesitant to do, i.e. bullet pointing out the key things and making yourself a little script. I think it is worth it. Don't read it word for word to the players, obviously, but so that you can paraphrase and hit the key points that you want in there. I think that's also worth the effort.
I agree. And I would just add that for Pogodin's Mansion, it is worth to consider player backgrounds if you want to include anything of their family relations and their close connections. It is a beautiful, disturbing moment to do so because offices could display hundreds of photographs of their loved ones, their whatever you want. There are rooms and offices to your disposal. You don't have to make it combat heavy, as we described, I think, today, quite clearly. You can make it focused on various aspects of infiltration, on aspects of sneak infiltration. Yes, I understand the earlier comment, but yes, you could still infiltrate, but make it easy for the player characters to just go for the diamonds in the rough, to go for the elements that you want to display. Don't make it hard for them to kind of like make it hard enough for the first obstacle. But then, they figured out enough of elements that they can subdue the dogs and the guards and whatever. The main point you want to convey is like the story you want to tell. If the characters have a good background story, bring that in. The moment they go from the upstairs to the downstairs, that's when you dial up the pressure. That's when you make things obvious that this location in itself is not just any location. It is the moment of duality of bright day and night downstairs where changes happen. And then you can consider the way that you want to approach the ritual. There's going to be people everywhere. In the whole house, they're going to be in various situations and various opportunities for characters to interact with. This is where the campaign takes, obviously, the first really dark turn, and you can make it as gruesome and as horrifying as you want. But I think the main thing you need to consider about is what is really terrifying your players, or is it the aftermath of the actions that they do? Because what they will experience, the whole understanding that they've unleashed something and they've been touched by Chagediel, well, that's fucking disturbing, in my opinion. And then how do they deal with that in the aftermath? Because it's still technically Friday, Saturday, whatever day you make it, but there's security guards, there's, Pagodin and consorts are, they're known. The people around here will be people of renown. And if they go missing 48 hours, questions will be asked. And that's when the pressure is upon the players. How do they get away? Why do they hide certain evidence, or why do they not hide certain evidence? It's a big questions. Did they plan a getaway? I think you don't have to have everything ready. And I think it is okay to just roll with the aftermath of saying, you just take a car that's in a car park. It's running idle. The driver is dead next to it. You can expect it. It looks like his face turned inside out. Yes, make it horrifying. A ritual just happened on these grounds. You can make it as weird, as awful as you want. You can make it as easy as you want, too, for the characters to get out of here. Or you can make it as difficult as you want. And as we mentioned earlier today, that we both multiple times forgot, if they are really driven to action, they can take the fucking helipad and take the helicopter out of here. But I think it's just like, in my understanding, like the way I played it before, the way I run it in my head, the way I run it currently for my second run through, it's not about the big action thing. It's about the small things, about like the characters being together, the giving them the closeness of kind of evading something weird, covered in blood, driving a car out of a situation that they not fully understand, maybe smacking the door open, security guards like calling in for help, but nobody answers. Something that's just off the hooks, and just leaving them hanging there in the idea of they succeeded in something, but they're not really sure in what.
Yeah,
That's kind
yeah,
of,
and I think it's important that it feels, both like a success and not. Again,
yeah.
because in a way it is a total rug pull. It's like, you think you're curing the parasite, but you are absolutely not. But I'm sort of hoping that at least at the same time when you're executing this and things in a way go your way and you actually overcome obstacles, it also feels like a success at the same
Yeah.
time. Yeah, and in terms of the aftermath, I mean, the book has some suggestions. It talks a bit about how the Slavic Association might strike back, how you can end up in police custody, how you can be wanted by the authorities, and some suggestions on where you can find a shady apartment to hide in while the worst doesn't actually blow over, and so on. And I think that's all great. I also think that at this point, if you run the game so far, you can figure out for yourself logically what is the outcome of this, and you can run it from there.
And most likely by that point, you hopefully have put enough breadcrumbs into the player's agenda that they will have some idea where to go next. Is it the postcard of Pyotr? Is it um, medical history of Magda, or is it further investigation into the three Russians? You want to know more about Philip Kramer. There is a lot of uncertainty, which it should be. The players should feel a bit insecure, but they should have leads. And any and all leads from Pogonin's mansion, in my perspective, should definitely advance the story and would definitely bring them at one or the other point, either closer within the Berlin air circle of devastation, or it leads them further into Frankfurt under order, where, well, we are facing a completely different type of nightmare from a physical world perspective, I think. And so the aftermath of Pogodin's mansion, in my perspective, needs to be meaningful, that do not have, like, if you really want them to be captured by the police and have them be interrogated and whatnot, if you have that incentive, think of, because it's going to be a tough thing to sell to the players, and you have to play through all the roles. So be sure that you want to take that avenue. If you say they get away, but there will be consequences, which is so much easier and so much more fun, because their picture has been caught on camera. Anywhere they stop for gas, oh my god, you look like the same guy here and there. Think about how you want to perceive and pursue the agendas of Pogodin's mansion. And it doesn't have to stop there as well, because, again, consider who is at Pogodin's mansion. If they've talked to them before, police will put out an APB or something. They will inquire about who has spoken last to those people. If they are high-ranking members of public politics, newspapers, well, it could trickle down. If they got broken and they done something, well, they will be blamed for that stuff. Very, very likely. Wouldn't they?
Yes, I think at this point, your normal group of player characters will have left ample of traces all around Hamburg and Berlin, and I don't think it's going to feel unfair at all to have their faces show up on newspapers and television pretty soon.
Would you say that's the turning point of where the player characters become something more than just participants, but more like a player in a larger game?
Yeah, it probably is, right? Because this is where we are. I mean, if you go really do strange things, maybe it can happen even earlier. But I think we're starting. We didn't even start out as sleepers. Usually, you start out as called like aware, right? But
Yeah.
very soon things are going to ramp up, and yeah, now I think any pretense of normal life is very quickly going to erode after this point. Say goodbye to some of those co-worker and neighbor NPCs that you created as part of character creation. They are only going to show up in bad dreams from this point onwards, I think.
Or as dissonance and calling you out if they've seen you anywhere.
Yeah.
Dissidents. That's what the word is.
Yes. Maybe slightly exaggerating here, but not too much.
No. I think you're right. I think that was a very long, rambling episode. But Martin, what are your key takeaways about Pogodon's mansions?
I think it's a great set piece. I think it's an important, really important and gratifying, hopefully, sort of chapter ending for the first part of the campaign. I think that if player characters do something, slightly weird and offbeat, I think there are ways to make it work and make sense anyways. I think even if the ritual is not fulfilled properly, you can have a lot of the events still advancing, the incarnates still incarnating, but then maybe no one gets the mark. So the situation is different when Ivan Chesenko enters later and so on. So I think even if things go slightly awry here, it's not the end of the world. I think it's still going to
Not
be a
yet.
satisfying campaign. What else? Take the opportunity to have a bit of challenge, if that is combat or sneaking or social engineering, whatever the player character's strengths are, let them play to those strengths and sort of challenge them in those arenas. I think that's it.
I think I've said my piece earlier today, so with that, I think we conclude A Killer's Stands, don't we? The player characters have learned and understood that there's a threat against them. They've been infected by Mark Oliver, and they've, well, by that point, eliminated the three Russians, only to unleash further damage. And I think with that, for tonight at least, for this episode, I say thank you, Martin. It was a
Thank
great
you,
discussion.
David.
And we'll be back soon with, well, maybe some insight into how players actually felt how Black Madonna is being run. And then we'll pick up with how to go from here. Where do you go from Pagodan's mansion, and what options do you have? And, well, I guess we'll discuss all of that in our soon episode. So stay tuned, like us, subscribe, or whatever you want to do, share. We're happy. And if you have any questions, please let us know. Happy to answer. Until then, see you next time.